Okay, so really quickly, I wanted to show you something in your textbook. This is in chapter 16, and if you look in your syllabus, I lay out all the different chapters and things that we're going to be going through in class. And please do look at your book. I think it's great. We chose it not only because we like the sort of like workbook materials and things like that, but it also has a really good way of explaining things. And this is kind of what I've highlighted here, is getting at that concept of spice, right? That you get something that, it adds something to which your author is calling the framework, the harmonic framework, right? But what's really interesting here is this. I think this is the spicy metaphor where you can take the cooking thing a little bit further. So adding embellishments will not correct a faulty framework. It won't. You're not going to be able to make your music better by adding embellishing tones if the underlying music is bad. So you're not going to fix any problems that you had necessarily if the music you wrote is not particularly good. Just like, I guess you could, like if your food tasted really bad, you could just add a whole bunch of salt or sugar to it and it would be okay. It's like you cook something that's really bad and you put a bunch of ketchup on it and eat it. But that's not necessarily good practice. So that's not necessarily what we want to do. Okay. Again, here, this is filling in just a little bit more of the stuff that we're seeing in class, right? So we're adding, when we have a passing tone, right? You have a skip of a third, that's a passing tone, skip of a fourth. You could add two passing tones, as I say over here. This is a little less common. And we're going to talk about neighbor tones in a second. But I wanted to show you this just because this happens all the time. That if you have a skip, like right here, you can add a passing tone in. Like there's no reason why Bach couldn't have done that, and it would have been totally fine, right? Every time, in fact, that you have a third, he could have put one in. It doesn't necessarily make it better, but it will function correctly, and these would be passing tones, and that would be a passing tone. And this is what you'll be doing on your homework for this chapter. Okay, so here's some Palestrina, right? So the process, how do we figure out like what are we supposed to write here? Like what is the Roman numeral? What's the harmony? Well, the process is the same. You want to stack up your notes and then try to make a snowman. And then you think, what is not working, right? What does the harmony look like it should be? And I know this is a little vague. Like what is it? What does that even mean when I say what should be? But that'll start to make more sense as we see more stuff and we get more discussions about what the harmony could be and the logical underpinnings of it. And there's this thing that we'll talk about, I think, next week or so that is called the basic phrase model. And that helps us kind of create sort of an overarching rule set that can work or could work, or a thing that we should think about as the kind of base level, and then we sort of try to make the music fit within that rule structure. Okay, so the process is basically the same, right? We want to look at everything that is here and consider that a chord. So what notes do we have? Well, if we look at it, we've got from the bottom up, we have a G, right? And again, I'm reducing this all down to just one clef and taking out all the octaves. We have another G, don't care. We have an A, ooh, dissonance. We have a B, we have a D, we have a C, we have a B and a D, we already have those. We have a G, we already had that. We had a B, we already had that. We had a C, we already had it. We had a D, we already had it. We had a B, we already had it. And that's going to happen a lot, that you're just going to have all these repetitions, right? Again, it's one of the things about our music that we don't care that this D and this D exist. This one, I know this looks kind of weird, this is a tenor clef, so that this is actually an octave lower. If you guys are singers, you may have seen the thing with the 8 there. We don't care as a listener this D and this D exist. They are the same thing for the purposes of looking at our harmony. Okay, so this is our chord. Well, that's not a chord, right? That is way too many notes to be a triad, right? It's 5 notes. But we're in the key of G, right? And this is just the visual thing. If you look at this theoretically, right? Well, just cut those off. What do you get? 1. Is there a more logical way to do that? Not really. Like you're in the key of G and you wrote out a G major chord. Well, it's almost certainly going to be a G major chord, because this is getting at that concept I was talking about earlier with the sort of basic phrase model thing. You're in G. Your ear wants that to be a 1 chord. There's a G in the bass. Like you don't want it to be anything else. You're not going to hear it as anything else necessarily. So if you pull those things out, that means all of the A's and the C's are dissonance. And you would go through then and say, cool, that's a dissonance, and that's a dissonance, and that's a dissonance. And what are they? Well, if you look at them, all of those are filling in a consonant skip. That's a consonant skip. That's a consonant skip. So that means this thing is a passing tone. And we're going to abbreviate that PT. And this is exactly how you would analyze this. Circle, you write PT. You circle PT. And that's it. If you pull all of those notes out, the A's and the C's, you get 1. And that's literally what you would hear, right? If you go and listen to this Palestrina, you're going to hear that as a 1 chord, period. And the things that are circled, right, are dissonance. They look less important in the sense that these are all quarter notes. They're not on strong beats. They're there to embellish the music. And if you pulled them out, and instead of these being dotted half notes, they were just whole notes, it would be fine. It just wouldn't be nearly as interesting, right? It wouldn't be nearly as tasty. So that's the process, okay? We'll stop with this one. The next one, we'll go ahead and take a look at some other forms of dissonance, and there are a bunch of them. Again, over the course of your homework, you'll start kind of applying these and trying out different processes to manipulate them. Okay, so another type of dissonance, we have neighbor tones. We actually did these in species counterpoint. We called them consonant neighbor tones, and I basically told you not to do them, though they were possible. They were an option. And I think very few of you actually ended up using them, which is fine. Neighbor tones are a dissonance that's approached by step and then goes right back to where it started, right? So you can think of it like your neighbor in the dorms or something, or your neighbor at your house, right? You go over to your neighbor's house and then you come right back, right? That's it. You're going there and you're coming back. It is music that sort of moves. It's almost like it's supposed to be a passing tone, and then it doesn't quite do that. And we have 2 different types of neighbor tones, and they're just differentiated by the direction that they go. So they're going to be the lower neighbors and upper neighbors, or what we'll call LNTs and UNTs. This one down here in this example, this is an upper neighbor tone. Could just be this C major chord, and this could just be this 5/7, a 1 and 5/7 in the key of C. But I threw in this A flat here that goes up and comes right back down, and this is like very spicy. This thing here is called an upper neighbor tone, but it's also a chromatic upper neighbor tone, right? And these happen chromatically. It's much more likely, at least for what you guys are going to be doing, that you're just going to see it as an A, and that's just an upper neighbor tone. But it is possible that these things could be chromatic, like this could be an F sharp, and that would be a chromatic lower neighbor tone. Those are very common in music. They're just as common as sort of the other types of music you might hear, like passing tones and things like that. And they're going to happen all the time. So let's look at some Schubert. I'll probably, at some point, since this is the beginning of me figuring out how to make these videos, I'm going to probably include links for you guys so you can listen to the examples that I pull off the internet. Because obviously this is Schubert, it's open source and free to listen to, so you should be able to listen to it. Yeah, so this music, looking at it, right? We're in the key of D minor, but what's super cool about it is all these things in yellow. Things in yellow are some form of dissonance or some form of chromaticism. And you actually don't have language for them right now, but they are super cool sounding. It sounds really kind of slinky and creepy and sort of nice. Well, let's kind of ignore the intro here and just kind of look at this. If we're in the key of D, right, if you take all of these notes here and you try to figure out what chord it is, just take a second and look at it. You're thinking up from the bottom, right? You get A, E, A, C sharp, A. Okay, so remember, this has an accidental in it. That accidental, for you guys entirely for 101 is the leading tone, which means whenever you see a chord with an accidental, it is either a 5 or a 7. Period. Full stop. That's it. It's the only option. And this happens to be a 5. And that 5 then happens to go to what? Well, if you look at all of this, and again, I'm telling you this is the harmonic rhythm. I'm telling you that that's a chord. Eventually, you're going to do that yourself. You're just going to find the harmonic rhythm and analyze it, and we'll talk lots about how to do that. But for the purposes of what we're doing now, let's just say everything I just circled there here is a chord. Okay. Well, if you go from the bottom, right, we have a D, then we have an F, and then we have another D, D, A, B flat. And you see I've already labeled that as an upper neighbor tone, right? Because if you look at this, right, just look at what's happening here. Oops. Look at what's happening here musically. You have a 16th note, B flat. If you wanted to, you could take this music and reorder these chords and get this, right? Because that actually makes a chord. It makes a 7th chord. And in the key of D minor, that chord makes sense. That is a 6-7. So you could say and try to prove the point that objectively this is a 6-6-5 chord. And you would be very wrong. You would be empirically correct because literally it is, right? Like that is a 6-6-5 chord. But there's absolutely no way, if you listen to this music, where you hear D, F, A on the downbeat, that your mind is not going to think tonic. And there's absolutely no way that your mind and your ear are going to think that note right there, that note is not only important, it is the most important note of the chord. That is the tonic chord, or the tonic note, right? That's just not going to happen, right? So what you're actually hearing is that's not part of the chord. If you pull it out, then you don't get 6-6-5, you get 1, and you get an upper neighbor tone. It happens all the time, like all the time in music. You get these sort of small moments like that can be a little bit confusing because this is very logical. Ooh, this is very logical, but this is wrong. This thought process is wrong. And this is the thinking and listening thing that we talk about a lot. Again, I'll try to get you links somehow to listen to all these things. If you don't have a link, you can Google this. Just Google Schubert and Rost. I'm sure you'll find it. The thinking and listening portion is that if you think about it, right, your mind is likely going to think that, and that's totally logical. However, if you listen to it, you're not going to hear that. You're going to hear home. And that's the process we want to start getting better at and better at as we get further and further through theory, that you can think, oh, that's going to be home, so that you can just look at this, you know, as a musician, as a performer, and think, ooh, 1. And the B flat doesn't think, ooh, I wonder what that is. You're thinking, ooh, I want to like ghost that note a little bit because it's a dissonance on a weak beat, and it's going to sound really cool and kind of, you know, dark, and that's lay as a syllable, and you're going to pull that back down to A flat. And I don't speak German, but ich is I don't know. And you want to like, maybe it's part of Merck, I don't know. But you want to do something with the text there that is, I don't know, interesting, that has to do with the fact that this is an upper neighbor tone. And that may seem a little bit cumbersome and sort of ridiculous to sort of think about at this point in your life. But remember, all you're trying to do is prepare yourself to have literally every possible tool that you can as a performer, as a teacher, as a composer, as a thinker, as a musical person. That's the whole point of why you're learning this stuff. Cool. So we'll break it there, and we'll talk about some more of these dissonances in the next video. Okay, so we're going to try writing some dissonances in SATB counterpoint. And this is actually what you're going to do in the homework that's assigned at some point, which would be 16.1 out of the workbook. Is the opposite sort of what we did in the previous examples there. So let's actually try this one. I'm going to rewrite some of this here to make this a little bit easier. But let's try, yeah. try one of these like this. Let's get us a dominant chord one. 1, 5, 7, 1. Let's just try that for now. And then we'll do the predominant ones in a little bit. Let's add in a neighbor tone. Let's try to add in a passing tone also. So the way you want to think of this is let's just write these things like just normally, right? Just try to write them as best you can, without thinking about the dissonance. Just try to solve this puzzle. Okay, so 1 in the key of G minor is G, B flat, and D. And you can voice this out however you want. If you guys are following along at home, it doesn't matter if you voice it like that. I'm just going to pick one. And then you think, cool, 5, 7 in the key of G. Well, you go to D, right, because that's 5. And then you think this. And then you pause for a second and think, okay, yep, I need an F sharp, because that is the leading tone. You have to have an accidental. And again, you want to voice this as smoothly as possible. The G is closest to the F sharp, so it wants to resolve down. The D is closest to the C, so it wants to go down. And the B flat is closest to the A, so it wants to go down. And that's going to be fine, right? This one creates unequal fifths. For the purposes of 101, I don't really care about that for you guys. These look like parallel fifths, but they're really not. So don't worry about that too much right now. Now, we want to resolve this. No, we haven't talked about this at all, right? Or the idea of putting in a neighbor tone or any of that stuff. We're just trying to solve the puzzle. Then we resolve it, right? That, I guess, goes back down. The leading tone there must go up. This is the chord 7th here. That must go down. And then the A can go 2 different places. The A could go up to the B flat, or it could go down to the G. And it doesn't matter. If it goes down, you have a tripled root. If it goes up, you have a doubled third and a doubled root. Regardless, we have no fifth, and that's fine, right? That's actually always going to happen, if you remember, because we have a 5, 7 to 1 that will always create a complete to incomplete or an incomplete to complete paradigm if you do it correctly, if you follow the rules. So, I don't know. Let's go with the G. And let's just try to add a neighbor tone to this one, just to go through that process. If we add a neighbor tone, well, you can literally do them wherever you want. Wherever you have some sort of oblique motion or you have some sort of steady motion in the voices, right? So we could do, I don't know, like D, like this. That would be a neighbor tone, right? It goes up and comes right back down. You could do one here, like this. That's another neighbor tone. And notice what I'm doing. I'm just finding a spot where you can put one in. You write it in, and then you come right back up, right? That's a chord tone. And that's it, right? It doesn't really matter where they go or necessarily what they're doing. You just want to experiment with trying to keep them in or to put them in somewhere. I'm going to change the harmony here. We'll take out these neighbor tones, and I'll show you a passing tone option. Don't mind my deleting here. I'm going to change this into a 5 chord. Oops. So now we no longer have that C, right? Well, this makes sense then. You keep the D there. And this would also be a good example. Say this was the assignment, right? To go 1, 5, 1. To put in a neighbor tone, like you could do that, right? And the neighbor's up and goes back down. And that'd be totally fine, except for this would create parallel fifths, so don't do that. Just ignore that. Never, just don't forget I ever said anything about that. Now this is on film. Oh no. I'm ruined. Okay. Okay, so passing tone, though, you can create a passing tone. Check this out. That's a third right there. Why don't we put in a passing tone, right? This is filling in the consonant skip. It's passing down. And that's exactly where you would want one. And it's actually exactly where you would see it. But hopefully you can also see what's happened there. It's one of the curious things about music is that what that created was a passing tone. But that also created a 5/7. And this is where that chord tone comes from. So the question is, like, which one of these is more correct? Is this a 5 with a passing tone? Or is this a 5/7? And that is like a really interesting question, right? And I don't know. It kind of depends on the context. It depends on how you hear it. It depends on where the music is. It depends on how hard the altos hit that or the violas play that. It depends on if they, pull back on that and add more emphasis to it. That's what's really cool about this stuff, right? Is that it could be either. This could be a 5/7 or this could be a 5 with a passing tone. And neither is more correct or wrong. And I know that sounds kind of weird and like inspecifically specific, but that's one of the beautiful, interesting things about music theory. So we'll stop there. This is actually what you're going to be doing on some homework in 16.1, like I said, at some point. And we'll introduce some more dissonances in future videos. But that is the gist of writing them, the gist of sort of understanding them through analysis.